Matt and Sarah Show, episode 3.
I know.
It's so crazy that we have a logo now for those watching visually. It's so official. It's amazing.
I forget that people just listen to podcasts.
Yeah,
like that's a thing.
Yeah,
I'm slow.
It's fine.
Well, we are going to be starting to kind of do. Obviously, we want to kind of fill in what we're talking about, which is anything but real estate, just because real estate, it's great. We all love it here, but I get bored also after listening to, real estate for like 5. I get bored listening to myself because I'm like one of those people that will rant. And then like 5 minutes in, I'm like, wait a second, no one actually cares about this. So this is anything but real estate. Yes. And one thing Matt and I wanted to feature was what's on Netflix.
What's on Netflix. Yes. So the first literal episode of what's on Netflix, because we watched and Sarah brought up a crazy documentary that I then watched over vacation last week. And I was like, we have to talk about this because this is insane.
It's honestly one of the most fucked up things I've ever watched. Yeah. Ever.
Yes. So we are excited to share it with every single person.
Yeah. Hopefully you're in a great mood.
Yeah.
So this was a documentary called Girl in the Picture. And I think at one point, or it might even still be like top 10 on Netflix. So there's probably a lot of people that have seen it. But if you haven't, highly recommend.
Yes.
Highly recommend.
Yeah. I think it's number 2 or 3 on Netflix now.
Something.
It's wild.
It was definitely up there and I can understand why. So do you want to start out or would you like me to start with my
No, I'll kind of start with the general premise of it. There is a woman that gets murdered and you kind of know right away that it was the stepdad. Well, what we now know is the stepdad. It kind of labeled it at first as if they were husband and wife, which is crazy in and of itself, and we'll really dive into it. But the stepdad murders the daughter or the stepdaughter, who we'll find out actually had a child. They had a child together, if I remember correctly, and then he murdered that child as well. And he was like a complete psycho that like entered their lives kind of at a vulnerable moment of the mom's life. So it was like it was fully planned out. It was it was wild.
They all had several names. So she starts out with Tanya Hughes.
Yep.
Someone finds her on the side of the road and they're like, oh my God, this is like a person. They assumed it was like an animal or roadkill or something. They find her, they bring her to the hospital, and it's like a hit and run situation. And they find out that her name is Tanya Hughes. Oh, Lord. I'm so sorry, my phone is ringing. We'll just ignore that. Maybe we can like blur that out. But she gets hit by a car. She's at the hospital. Her name is Tanya Hughes. And so Tanya doesn't make it through her injuries. And when they get there, they see, okay, she's got like old bruises. Like something is off here.
Right.
She's like clearly been abused. This is not just like a one-time deal.
Yep.
So she gets, they call a friend, they call her husband. His name is, this time is Clarence.
Clarence, yes.
So Clarence Hughes shows up, says she's not allowed to have any visitors. And he tells one of her friends, at the time she was working as a stripper.
Yep.
And you also find out through this documentary that them stripper communities are toit. Let me tell you. They're in a girl gang. They were looking out for her. Let me tell you. So one of her friends that she makes, and by the way, she's only 20 years old, so she's like a kid, comes and visits her, and the nurses explain, like, hey, we think that this is not a hit-and-run situation where, basically they're insinuating that they think the husband did it.
Right.
And so Tanya, after she dies, they find the mother's information for Tanya Hughes, and they call. And they're like, hey, we're really sorry to inform you that your daughter is dead. And she's like, I don't know what the fuck you're talking about. My daughter died 20 years ago. She was only 18 months old.
Yeah.
And they're like, what?
Yeah. So then
no one knows who this lady is.
Right. Right. And at this point, this is kind of the first real turn in the documentary, because now you're like, okay, who is actually this person?
Yes.
And what actually is happening here? And this is like the first of like 18 actual like turns that happen.
Yep.
And it just kind of really sets the tone of like, and this is like probably within the first 10 minutes maybe?
Oh God, I don't even think it's, you mean make it 10 minutes you're in, you're like, what the hell's happening?
You're literally like, what is going on? And it like draws you in, and it's, you get just
And like you said, she did have a 2-year-old son. And when her friend went to visit, the nurses explained, you really need to call DHS because this kid clearly is in not the best situation. So the kid's name is Michael. He gets placed into DHS and he's placed with a foster family. And they're actually a really sweet family in the documentary. Nice. They talk about like how much they loved him and that, you know.
He was like shy at first.
And he was only drinking Pepsi out of a bottle. Like that's the only thing he would have for like the first 2 weeks. It was definitely a screwed up situation. And so from the time he enters foster care, Clarence starts aggressively pursuing Michael, his son, to get him back. So they actually show footage of him like on the news.
Yes, actually.
Petitioning like whoever to say that he was taken advantage of and that the only reason why he couldn't take care of his son is because he was so broken about his wife dying and the whole nine. And it's pretty convincing, to be honest. Like if you're just like a person watching the news, you're like, oh my God, I could like totally see this.
Yeah, I feel for this guy. And it
just goes to show that these psychopaths like are very regular. Yeah. I feel like you picture these like dark, creepy people.
Right.
But they can pass as regular. But I don't know, this guy, aside from the news articles seeing it firsthand, everyone described him as a friggin' weirdo. So
well, didn't he like drive around the house too and like start stalking the people's house? And
he starts showing up and like pulling up to the foster family's home, and the foster mom calls DHS and is like, hey, does Clarence drive a truck? And they're like, you're paranoid. It's not him.
Yeah.
So then, the guy goes to Michael's school. At this point, Michael is 6 years old. So he's been in this foster family for 4 years. Oh, wait. Take a step back. It's discovered that Clarence is not the father because the DHS wants to do a paternity test to prove his, custody situation, whatever, because he's constantly fighting him. And he has visitation with Michael that Michael does not want. Right. Makes it clear, I don't like this guy, don't want to see him, don't want to be around him.
Yep.
So they do a paternity test. Turns out Clarence is not the father. All of his rights are terminated. And then he starts stalking the foster family.
Yes. Yeah.
And the foster mom kind of sounds the alarm, like, hey, something weird's going on. And they're like, no, it's fine. You're being paranoid. And then he friggin' goes to the school and holds the principal at gunpoint and tapes him to a tree. And tapes his eyes and mouth shut. Obviously, he takes him to kidnap Michael.
I'm taking this child.
I'm taking the kid, and you're going to help me. They both get in the car. He carjacks the principal, tapes him to a tree, and then someone finds him eventually, and Michael's missing. So that's how this investigation starts, is that they're looking for this missing kid, Michael. They know that the mother passed away. They think it's just an accident, because at this point it's labeled an accident. It was a hit and run, even though they had their suspicions. They didn't have enough to go on it.
To actually go on it, that's right.
And this was in September 12th of 1994. I took way too many notes.
No, I love it. I love it.
And so he gets held hostage, and then they kind of find out, all right, he had taken out a life insurance policy on his wife, Tanya, before she died. And when he went to claim that, the Social Security number that he used linked him to the name. Sharon? Oh, God, what was the name? Franklin Floyd.
Oh, him, right. Him.
And Franklin Floyd was his real name. And when they looked up Franklin Floyd, they saw that he had several sexual assault and kidnapping charges, robbery charges, and was a convicted pedophile.
Right.
So they're like, oh no, what is this?
Right.
And so
another turn. Again, this is turn 2 where you're like, okay.
What?
Right, what is going on?
And they're making, and when you find out that he's not the dad, you're like, what? He's not the dad? And then he kidnaps him, and now he's actually Franklin Floyd. And because they have his actual name, they're able to kind of trace it. At this point, the FBI is involved. And over a 20-year period, he has several different names, and he is... Basically, at that point, they're like, we don't know if we're going to be able to catch this guy because clearly he's been on the run for 20 years and been able to, evade this.
Right.
And so at that point, the kidnapping is all over the news. And when they put the kidnapping all over the news, they also put Tanya's picture up. And there's a small town in Georgia that's like, hey, I know that girl, but her name's not Tanya. Her name is Sharon.
Right.
And you're like... What?
Right.
And a lot of her high school friends are calling the FBI, and they're like, hey, I know who that girl is, but her name is not Tanya. Her name is Sharon. Oh, God, what was the last name?
Oh, I have it right here, actually. Hang tight, please. Sharon Marshall.
Sharon Marshall. And so they describe her. Then they kind of go in throughout the documentary of talking about who Sharon was. So we know Tanya to kind of be... like a shiesty stripper, basically.
Right.
Everyone says she was really nice. She builds really good friendships within the stripper community, but they all thoroughly describe how creepy this relationship she had
with the dad.
Her dad.
Yeah.
I don't even think we've gone to that point. So people are gonna be like, "What do you mean? It was her husband?"
Right. Yeah.
So,
it's like.
So basically, they all describe Sharon. These are the people in Georgia once they see Tanya on the news after Michael's been kidnapped. They're like, hey, that's Sharon. Sharon is super nice, super smart, wants to be like an aerospace engineer, and she's in like the gifted children's club.
Yeah.
Like she's super brilliant, super smart. And all of the friends that she was with, she was like kind of like always rooted for the underdog. She was really beautiful. Mm-hmm. She didn't really have to, not like she like was like, there's nothing wrong with being a nerd. I'm a nerd. But she's saying out with like the underdogs, like the oddballs,
right?
By choice, because she was really beautiful and smart. She probably could have hung out with whoever she wanted, but she always rooted for the underdog. So all these people really went out of their way to like root for Sharon.
Right.
And so her dream they describe was to get to go to Georgia Tech. And turns out she gets a full scholarship to Georgia Tech in her desired program, which I think was the aerospace engineering program. And Sharon's dad is described by Sharon's friends as being super weird and extremely strict, to the point where like she would say, don't call me unless I know you're going to call me. Don't call too often.
Right.
She wasn't really allowed to do anything. She had to like take care of her dad. And the other parents were certainly put off by him. Like I think at one point one of the friends says that like the first time that he had met her parents, he asked them for money, like asked them for like $6,000 or something. And they were like, what
that's
the
a little
hell?
odd.
And so her friend says that after she gets into Georgia Tech, it's the full boat, she discovers that she's pregnant. And her father won't let her go to college and she explains to her friends, somebody has to take care of my dad. And they're like, okay, your dad's a creep.
Right.
Like, your dad's weird. And then she abruptly calls her friends, lets them know, I'm moving to Arizona with my dad. I'm going to put the baby up for adoption. And my dad's not going to let me go to college. So I'm just going to kind of wing it.
Right.
And so as her friends speak to the FBI, they explain, all of that Tanya Hughes is actually Sharon Marshall, and that Clarence Hughes, who they're on the news is saying is her husband, was her father, and her father's name was Warren Marshall. So that's another point in the documentary where we're like, what is happening?
Right.
What is happening? So it turns out that it's actually her dad.
Right.
And a paper trail kind of leads to the discovery that they changed their names in 1989 and that Warren, a.k.a. Clarence, married his daughter, Sharon, now Tanya. And they don't know why. They're like, why would you marry your daughter? But clearly this guy had issues.
Right. So again, the dad marries the daughter. The daughter is pregnant right now. The daughter is going to put the baby up for adoption, isn't going to go to school. Dad is a creep. That's where we're at. It's very complex. And we know the daughter who is pregnant at this point in time, when we started this little episode of the Mat Sara Show, that's the one that's dead.
Yes.
So just to kind of bring everyone into full circle here as to what the hell was happening.
And so this is at that point she starts stripping, and she's the people that she meets at the strip club. It's in Florida, and they explain the strip club to be like a very classy strip club in the 80s. There is such a thing, but it's the kind of place like a gentleman's club where like professional athletes and actors, and it was just a very affluent place where you could make a lot of money.
Yeah.
And so they make it clear that it doesn't seem like it's something that she wanted to do, but her dad was a big presence at the strip club and really wanted her to be doing it. So the initial group of people that she meets in Florida are like, this guy is so odd.
Right.
And so, and she's obviously pregnant. She begins stripping and getting into other kind of sex work, which is kind of gross because it's all dictated by her dad.
Yep.
And they kind of point out that they think it's kind of getting gross. And so she then has her son, Michael, and they explain that at this point Sharon's like a really wonderful mother, and that it unfortunately kind of fused her tie to Warren because Warren wouldn't let her son out of his sight, and they said that there was no way that she would like run away with, because they at this point, her friends now that are strippers in this, really nice club are like, you need to get away from him. Right. And they're like trying to do their best to be like, let's just separate from your dad now, like you're an adult.
Right.
But she knows he'll take my son and there's no way I can just leave him.
Right.
And so the friends start to kind of notice that another girl, Cheryl, who works at the strip club, this is another a very odd thing that pops up. It kind of comes in later, but her friend Cheryl comes over like 2 or 3 times a week. She's a really beautiful Italian girl. She drives a Corvette. She is stripping at this really affluent club because she sees it as a stepping stone. She was a pageant queen. She's going to this club. She thinks that it's going to get her into working as like a model in Playboy and all this stuff. And we're talking the 80s, buddy. Playboy is like it. So she's like, thinks she's on the fast track, but they describe her as being very naive.
Right.
And so Warren, Sharon's dad, says, if you let me videotape you and take pictures, I'll be able to get you in Playboy.
Right.
And she's naive and young and stupid. And she's like, yeah.
She lets it happen.
And she starts to spend time with Sharon's dad. And here I have to flip my absolutely insane notes. And so Cheryl tells her friends, so this is Sharon's friend, tells her friends that Warren had made sexual advances towards her and that she basically said no, and that he became extremely violent.
Yep.
And it was scary for her, and they said you need to get away from them. At this point, they kind of segue away from Cheryl, and for sake of surprise, I will too. So Sharon and her dad abruptly disappear. They just stop showing up, no call, no show.
Right.
They're gone. And so they leave from Tampa, and her friends believe that it's because everyone in Tampa is noticing how weird the relationship with Sharon and Warren were, and they just assume
just getting suspicious.
They're creepy and weird and whatever. Then the trailer they were living in blows up.
Catches on fire.
Blows up completely to the point where the stove is flying through the air. Like, it's completely a mess.
And I think the neighbor said that he saw somebody like run in for like 20 seconds and then just run out.
And this was the neighbor that babysat for them.
Correct,
and
right.
So that poor girl.
Yeah.
Just like having to witness that must have been just so creepy.
I know.
And so they kind of go back at this point and basically emphasize that while Sharon might have received an opportunity to leave, she couldn't, again, because her son, Warren never let her son out of his sight. And so Floyd, which if we go back is Warren's real name, was Franklin Floyd. So Floyd at this point, they know was convicted previously of abducting and raping a 4-year-old in the 1960s. So they're on alert, and they're kind of trying to tie all these pieces together. And at this point, all they know is that Tanya is Sharon and Michael is missing.
Right.
And that someone who is, her husband was previously in another life posing as her father.
Right.
They haven't really tied all the pieces together, but an old neighbor provides a photo of Floyd and Sharon from when Sharon was about 4 years old, where a behavioral science says that she's showing all the markers of being an abused kid. And that's actually the cover of like the documentary. Yeah. It's really sad to look at once you watch the documentary.
No, it is. Wasn't it like there was like no like
expression. She just looks like dead-eyed. Just like, clearly she's being abused.
Right.
And so based on her age at the time that she died, she should have been born between 1969 and 1970. And Floyd was in prison for that abduction from 1963 to 1972. So there was no way that he could have been her biological father. So now they're like, well, who the hell is Sharon?
Right.
Where did she must have been abducted because he has a history of abducting another 4-year-old. And so now they're like, oh my God, like we're trying to solve a kidnap on top of a murder, on top of another kidnapping. A missing child. It's like, what is happening? Yeah. And so they now have no idea who Sharon is, what her real identity is. Right. So they put out a notice in regards to all of Floyd's aliases at this point because they think just, as far as like history goes, that he'll reuse them because he has so many that he could easily go somewhere he used to live before and just renew an old license under an old name. Yep. And that's exactly what he does. And he gets pinged in Louisville, Kentucky, and they actually go hand deliver the license to him and arrest him, which I think is so badass. Like, oh, hey, by the way. And so they arrest him, but when they arrest him, there's no sign of Michael because if you remember, we're looking for Michael. Right. After all of this circus, we're looking for Michael. They can't find the 2-year-old. There's no evidence that he's had the 2-year-old when he got to Louisville. He's only got, one train ticket that he took in, whatever. And so Michael's kidnapping trial begins, and all of the people that Sharon were connected to come to testify. And one of the friends actually testifies to witnessing Warren sexually assault his daughter, Sharon. Yep. And that it was really traumatic for her to live through, and that...
Yeah, she was in the room when it happened.
Yes.
Like, sitting right next to...
And it was awful.
And then, not to sidetrack, but I'm pretty sure in that case, it was like, they were... Sharon and the friend were in the room.
And these are like 16-year-old girls.
Right. Yeah. And then the dad came in and like pointed a gun at him. They obviously the friend freaked out. The Sharon was just kind of like
she tried
so
to laugh
used
it off.
to it.
Yeah.
And then I forget if the friend tried to run or what happened, but he was like, "Oh, I'll be back."
Yeah.
And then the dad left, came back, and literally raped the daughter or Sharon right in front of the other girl, and just like, and Sharon was like, "Oh, it's fine. It happens all the time."
And she's like trying to console her friend, and it's like, you're trying to console me. Like, what is wrong with you? Like, are you okay?
Right.
And so, and at that point at the sleepover, they also testified that, she had a bunch of lingerie, and she was like, well, my dad buys this for me so I can wear it. And they're like, what?
Why does your dad buy a 16-year-old?
Exactly. Yeah. It's so yucky. And so Floyd, after, in a large part because her high school friends come and they testify.
Yep.
And this is like years later. This is like at least 10 years after she's out of high school. So it just goes to show she really was such a good person for people to just like not ever hear from her again and then just come to like complete defense to her, which was really nice.
Right.
But Floyd is convicted and sentenced to 52 years for kidnapping Michael, even though they have no idea where he is. They assume that he's dead just because statistics show that if you don't find kids in a certain amount of time.
It's like the first 48
They
hours
also said
or
that
something.
they started to like research who Floyd was and that they thought that he would get annoyed. Like eventually, I don't want to deal with this kid and just kill him.
Right.
And so while all that's happening, this is like the freakiest stuff. Like I feel like it's like divine intervention kind of came in somehow. Because he has this old truck and somebody finds photos taped to the bottom of the truck. And they're all child pornography. And a lot of them are of Sharon when she was really young.
Yep.
And they don't recognize one of the photos of a body, like a badly beaten body of a woman. And the FBI agent that's like, I think his name's Joe Fitzgerald, he's like the head guy. And he notices this picture and he's like, there's no way that this girl is still alive based on how badly she's beaten in these pictures.
Right.
So this guy's really brilliant. He's the one that sent out all the pings for all the aliases. And now he goes to all the police departments that there's a history of Floyd living in those towns and says, these are photos that we found. Maybe you can link them to any cold cases you have.
Right.
Well,
Sure enough,
in Oklahoma, they recognize a shirt that's in the photo that they found with a body of a Jane Doe that is discovered to be Cheryl, Sharon's friend, the one that wanted to be in Playboy.
Right.
So now that makes sense that they would flee Tampa out of nowhere because he killed somebody.
Because he killed the friend.
And they just dipped.
Right.
And it's like, yo, this guy is a monster. And he just like went on a rampage for like 20 years.
Right.
So they know, he also at that point, it kind of links, he knew just because he was like a really skilled con artist essentially, that at that point they would be looking for a father and a daughter and her kid.
Right.
They wouldn't be looking for a husband and a wife and their kid.
Right.
And that's why they stopped. He married her and changed her name.
Right.
Fucking gross.
So this is where I always say, like, these serial killers, these
psychopaths,
they're psycho, but it's gonna sound awful. They're brilliant.
That's usually the ones that get away with it.
Like, who would think of that? To be like, oh, like on the way out of Tampa, oh, they're gonna be looking for a father and daughter. Let's just go sign the papers.
And you're talking about a guy that's been on the run since the 70s.
Right. So
and at this point, it's the mid to late 90s. Yeah, no, it's crazy.
But
it's
like, he knows what
crazy.
he's doing. Like,
and that's what their fear was, is that he was basically good at evading.
Right.
And so they're able to convict him for killing Cheryl, and he is sentenced to death.
Yep.
So while that feels great, there's, people that are a part of the story that are like, well, now we have a ticking time bomb of like, who's Sharon? There's still so many like, who's Sharon?
We still don't know who Sharon
and we
really
still don't
Sharon
know where
is.
Michael is, because he's saying, even when he gets arrested for kidnapping Michael, they show footage of him saying, I love my son, I don't know where he is. So he's like sticking to like this absolute nonsense.
Right.
And so the leading FBI agent, that guy Joe Fitzpatrick, says that this and the Michael case, so knowing who Sharon was and the case of where Michael was, were the only two cases that he didn't close in his entire career. So he retires. And, it seems like everyone takes a special interest in this, which is like, how the hell do you not? We're clearly sitting here talking about it because it's like, oh, how do you not? This is crazy. And so an author a few years later, I think it said in 2005. No, This must have been in like the early 2000s.
Yeah. Yep.
So an author
writes a book on him, right, on Clarence.
Well,
I think
he sees. So I guess there's like a website. I wish I wrote it down of like all people that are still considered missing, and like we don't know who they are.
Yep.
And he saw that picture of her as a little girl with him, which it's supposed to be like a picture. I feel like if you're not paying attention, it just like looks like a dad and a daughter.
Right.
And it's just so gross to think of what it actually was. But he notices the picture and he's like, wow, I want to find out more about this. He does start writing about Floyd. He actually interviews him in prison. He says he's an absolute psychopath. He doesn't get any information out of him, doesn't answer anything. He kind of just goes on like these narcissistic rants.
Yep.
He talks a lot about his own abuse, and the author does explain like, not that it excuses any of it, and he's clearly a monster, but he can see how he became a monster.
Right.
Like, it looks like he was sexually tormented his entire life in an orphanage.
Right.
And it just kind of talks about himself, but they don't know anything about... He doesn't find anything out.
Right.
So he puts the book out. It's kind of unfinished. He just basically says, like, I still don't know who Sharon is, but... The story, clearly, is so interesting that this is like the early internet where there's like forums online that everyone's talking about like all different stuff about, we want to know who this person is.
And like completely blows up.
Completely blows up. And then in 2005, they get an anonymous email. This is the author. And because he said that he kept getting emails and he would actually respond to them because he felt like he let everyone down. He was super disappointed.
By not finishing the book almost.
And not finding out who she was because he was so frustrated. So in 2005, he gets an anonymous email asking if the DNA of Sharon's daughter would be helpful. What do you mean? Yeah. What do you mean she has a daughter?
Right.
What do you mean? And so this is a daughter that Sharon put up for adoption. So it turns out she was pregnant several times.
Yep.
At least 3 that they're aware of. 1 Michael and 2 other adoptions.
Yep.
And so this is a daughter that was put up for adoption, and she read the book as a junior in high school because her adoptive parents actually met Sharon and Warren, or Sharon and Floyd.
Floyd, yeah.
And they described Floyd being, he ran the show. Sharon didn't really say anything. The adoptive mother actually had time alone with Sharon in the room after she delivered the baby and said, do you want to see her? She said no. And she explains how she's frustrated that Sharon didn't ask for help. But when you're conditioned from the time you're 4 years old,
it's just your life,
you're just
unfortunately.
not going to. You probably wouldn't even remember
right.
what her life was like before that.
Right.
And so... In 2010 or 2011, the daughter, her name's Megan, she tested her DNA to find more family. And the Center of Missing and Exploited Children gets involved, and they ask Joe Fitzpatrick, who's now a retired FBI agent who led the initial investigation, to help them continue to investigate, which he does gladly because it obviously stays on your mind.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine.
Crazy. Yeah, so Franklin Floyd is interviewed again because they're like, they have nowhere else to go. He's the only guy that knows what happened. They've kind of done all they can do.
Right.
And Joe kind of tells the FBI agents that are going in, he's like, he's just going to lie to you.
Yeah.
You're probably not going to get anything out of it.
Right.
It wasn't like they were optimistic going into this, but they were like, this is really the last-ditch effort that we have. There's nothing else we can do. And so they wanted to find, there's 2 FBI agents, and they wanted to know 3 things. They wanted to know who is Sharon, what happened to Michael, and did he kill Sharon? And so they said that they thought they were leading with the first question of who's Sharon because he wouldn't be like admitting to killing anybody. They thought it would be likely that maybe he would be interested in kind of talking. But the first thing he actually admits to is shooting Michael in the back of the head.
Yep.
He like pretends to cry.
Yep.
The FBI agents kind of call bullshit. They're like, you're not upset. And he goes stone cold. And he says, I shot him in the back of the head twice. I made it real easy.
Yeah.
And then he says that he buried him somewhere, but they never actually find him.
Yeah, that's right. There's like a week-long
search
for him. They're like digging up like parts of
really
like forests, and they can't ever find him.
So sad. But they then ask like, who's Sharon? And at this point, they say that he just likes to talk about himself and anything that he's done, and obviously the light in which he's painting this story is not like reality. Right. So he explains that he was at the time going by Brandon Cleo Williams, which is an alias they didn't know, and had they might have found out who Sharon was earlier. But he helped a woman he met get her kids back from DHS in Michigan. And Sharon's name was Suzanne Savakis. So we finally know who the hell Sharon is. Her name was Suzanne Savakis. And both of her parents were actually alive.
Right.
When they found that out. They still are alive. They're actually in the documentary.
Yeah. That was
Mom
wild.
is
When
shiesty, bro.
when they panned to the mom, I was like, oh my god.
No, because Floyd marries Suzanne's mom. He meets her in a church. She meets him for like 5 minutes and is like, "Yeah, I'll marry you."
Right.
And
he
so,
like promised her the world. Kind of that's
Yeah.
It's almost like it is a psychopathic behavior of like, I'll take care of you. I'll take care of your kids.
and
You
she's
don't have to
clearly
do
working
anything.
with a deficit. Like she's not all there.
Right.
And so the mom is arrested while she's married to Floyd for writing a bad check.
Yep.
And she's in jail for like 10 days or 30 days or something. And when she gets out, she discovers that he took 2 of her daughters and dropped them off at an orphanage and took Suzanne.
Yeah.
And at that point, they go into like the dad. The dad was actually offered to adopt all 3 of the kids. Because at the time when she had initially lost them, but he had just gotten back from Vietnam and he was like all banged up.
Yeah, he said he wasn't in the
right. He was like
mental
23
space.
years old.
Yeah.
Because back in the day, man, you had kids so young.
Right.
Like the lady was like, I was pregnant when I was 18 and I was married and I was thrilled. I'd be like, oh my God.
Just graduated high school.
Yeah, but they talk about like the granddaughter, the one with the DNA that reached out to the author, says that, she'd tried to reach out to her grandmother and she's shown no interest. So it's almost like, did that happen or did you kind of just not want to be a parent anymore and pawn off your daughter to this creep?
Right.
Because that kind of seems like it could be plausible. I don't know. Like they first paint the story in a very like, obviously it's sad light. It's a sad story, but the things you find out about the mom after are just odd.
Right. Right.
But in 2017, her headstone is replaced with her real name, and her friends and her daughter are able to kind of like have a service for her. But it doesn't really make it any better. It's still super sad, depressing
I know.
story.
It really is.
And it's like, clearly you just heard me and rant with my notes, but like there's so much more detail in that. Like there were times where I was like, I can't take any more notes. I'm just going to sit and watch this for a minute.
But like in real,
so
like kind of
much.
general overview to kind of go through everything. It starts off with this guy who meets somebody at a church, a woman, promises her the world, says he'll take care of her kids, all that. They get home, they're living this, what appears to be a happy life. The mom goes to jail for 10 days because of a bad check, which is just mind-boggling to me to begin with.
I know. I didn't even know that was a thing.
Yeah. The mom gets back home, her kids are missing. This psychopath who we now know is prone to abusing and kidnapping and killing and molesting children has the 3 kids, drops 2 of them off, obviously keeps Suzanne, who was Sharon / Tanya / all these names.
I know.
And then so they literally flee. He forces her into essentially sex trafficking / prostitution, is molesting her during this time, gets her pregnant with a child, well, 2, probably 3, probably 3, then kidnaps that said child and then murders that said child, but doesn't do anything with the other dog. It is
gone.
It is wild.
And it's hard.
It's completely wild.
Yeah, it's absolutely crazy. And they also she got thrown out of some of the strip clubs, which we didn't even talk about, because some of them were like high-end strip clubs, and they were meant to cater to like millionaires. They talk about how they took Sharon to a millionaires club, and she was like, this lady's obviously like the OG stripper. Like she is like the OG. She's like the boss. She's like intimidating. And she's like, I took her to this party. You just dance. No one's allowed to touch you. There's no lap dances allowed. It's a classy millionaires club in the Tampa area. We just dance for entertainment. You take 3 songs, you make $1,000, you leave. And Sharon got kicked out because she said her dad told her to offer sex work to the people there.
Right.
And the gentleman that was throwing the party said, get this girl out of here.
Yeah.
Like, we don't want her here.
Right.
So just think of that poor girl is like, just like trying to like not lose her son and just like trapped in this like hell.
Yep.
And remains really nice because every single person that talked about her throughout the entire documentary talks about how amazing she was.
Yeah.
And they say like, she's one of those strange people that if she had gotten out of the situation, they think she would have gone to be like a huge victims advocate. Like they were like, she had the strength to make it out and like be okay.
Right.
But he
unfortunately he killed her.
And he never got convicted for it either.
Right.
Never.
Right. He never got it. I forget it. Did he get is he dead right now? I forget how
I don't
that
know.
ended.
He might have. I don't remember.
I forget if he was.
I fucking hate that guy.
I know.
Like, I don't care. I hope he rots.
But
I hope he stays alive till he's 110.
Literally
in jail.
But it was like I said, I watched it on vacation, and Michelle and I were literally
I know
like,
you texted me. You're like, we can talk about that.
Like,
I was
this
mind
is
blown.
amazing. Like, this is
It's
the craziest
crazy.
thing. And she loves that stuff, and she was
Yeah.
like, I can't believe what's happening.
It's just crazy that there's people walking around out there, and it makes you think, like, are there situations like that
that I've
like,
just passed by.
do I know somebody
Right,
who's like
that-
actually kidnapped?
right.
Like, I don't know. Like, these people, she spent her time in Georgia and was there for like her whole childhood. Like, these are people that knew her and were just like, you just have a creepy dad. But I guess that's the 80s, man.
Yeah.
The 80s, they were like,
Like, you
mind your
didn't-
business.
Well, you didn't even think about it. Yeah, I mean, if you see that nowadays, I mean, that
think it would be
gets
more
caught. I mean,
sooner.
You would like to think it would be caught sooner, and just people are more aware. People like,
Yeah.
I mean, you go to somebody's house now and you watch them get raped in front of you. I mean,
Just say something.
you're gonna say something. Like, so
It's also because think about how traumatic, and the woman explains like that she was never the same after that. She had her own mental health issues after witnessing that. It's just like all horrific.
I forget too. They asked her why she didn't say something. Do you remember that part?
know.
I forget.
Yeah.
They asked her why she didn't, and then she was like, it was
just too
too
traumatic.
traumatic or something, or she didn't.
And she was held at gunpoint. So I feel like when you're like 14, 15, 16 years old, someone rolls up on someone's dad,
right.
holds you at gunpoint, and then rapes someone in front of you. It's kind of like you might be naive enough to think like he would actually come to my house and hurt me, when in
Right.
reality,
Probably not.
But I don't know.
But you don't
It's
know.
crazy.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. You're a freshman or sophomore in high school.
Child.
Like you're.
Oh my
You
God.
I can't even fathom.
no,
like
no.
legitimately could
I
not
think about
even
how
fathom.
I thought when I was like 20, and I'm like, ugh.
It's like,
I was like a child.
Right.
And I think that Sharon died when she was 20 years old. Like she had been through all of that.
All of that in a 20-year life.
And he kept her, like kidnapped her and kept her for 15 years.
Yep.
It's just absolutely crazy.
Yep.
Just crazy.
Yeah, and I mean, I think there's a whole other story, like you were talking about, to be said about the mom and the
Oh,
dad.
yeah.
Like, to me, if one of my kids got, like, just was not there when I got home, like, I would do everything
Exactly.
in my life. My life would,
stop.
everything in my life would stop, and my
Yeah.
life's goal would be to find my child.
Exactly.
Like-
and that's kind of how Michael's foster parents were.
Yeah.
Because the foster family he was with for 4 years, they never stopped looking for him. They were on the news.
Right.
They were like asking for help, and they explained like, Sharon's mom went to the police one time.
Right. And then just
And
kind of,
It's kind of like one of those devil's advocates things, because it's like back then in the 60s and 70s, if you're a mom with a certain reputation where you've already lost your kids to DHS, that's another thing she said, my kids have been kidnapped by this person. They said, well, are you legally married to him? She said, yes. And he said, it's not kidnapping. You need to go to
that's
civil
right.
court.
Yes, that's
But
right.
at that point, I mean, I'm a mom. I'd burn the fucking place down. I mean, I would be like, no, honey, that's
I'm not
gonna
taking that
work.
for
I
an
don't
answer.
care.
Yeah.
But that's why I was born now, not in the 60s, because
Right.
I've probably been killed.
I mean, I can't imagine it'd be that way. I hope it wouldn't be that way now.
No, it's hard.
But, like-
there is a lot of red tape, I feel like, in
Yeah.
some circumstances. And, there also wasn't technology then.
Right. Right.
Now
I
they
mean,
have
now,
like
I mean, you could
in
track your-
sneakers you can put those Apple things in your kid's shoe for like when you go to Disney World or something.
Right,
Like
so you could
crazy
track
like that.
them and, like,
and some
figure
of
out
the
where they
stuff
are.
you just don't think about until you have a kid is just so crazy. Like I used to make fun of the people that keep their kids on leashes, and I'm like, yo,
That's a
Yano's getting a
genius
leash
move.
when we go to Disney. 'Cause this kid will bolt on
I
me.
saw a kid with a leash, and when we were up there, he was up
Listen,
in
don't
up in
judge the
Bar
mom.
Harbor.
Could be a psychopath. Could be a
yeah.
crazy kid.
But literally, Michelle was like, "That's kind of smart." Like, you
No,
like,
well, they're like,
you kn-
and now
you know
they got
they're
the
not
special
going
cut.
anywhere.
Oh yeah, like it's just so crazy. That's like the people, like I don't even know. We'll have to look up the story about a kid that got kidnapped at Disney, and a lot of them, like if it's a girl, will like shave their heads and make them look like a boy and
my
put boy
God.
clothes on them. So it's like people just get so. They're just gross.
It's gross.
And they're able to stay
It's
on the run
gross.
for so long
Right.
that like they're obviously, like you were saying, good at it, which
Yeah.
is even more terrifying.
It's horrifying. They're
Yeah.
brilliant in the wrong ways.
Exactly,
Like
'cause
if
this
they
guy-
could just take that
Yeah.
intelligence towards something,
How do you get
useful.
someone in a school system
Right.
with like 3 different names?
Well,
like how does that happen?
And that's the other crazy part. Like, imagine walking in nowadays to try, like,
Yeah.
if you walk in with a pistol into a school and be like, I'm just gonna take that child, and the principal is like, yeah,
Yeah, let's go.
get him down here.
Yeah,
Like, we're
no,
going. It's like,
can't.
what?
Yeah,
Like,
it's just crazy.
That's even for that time. That's insane.
Wild.
That's insane.
Wild. And I
But-
also think the new, like obviously there was like national news, and I'm sure that there's some people that might remember this. And clearly it was national news because that's how they discovered that Tanya was Sharon, because it was on the news. But I just feel like things are able, like Amber Alerts weren't a thing then.
Yeah.
And the system really failed Michael. You know, like the foster mom called and was like, this guy is driving by my house and I really think something's going on, and they just dismissed her.
Right.
Imagine if they didn't.
Right. The
Poor
whole
little
thing,
Michael.
whole thing would have been very, very
But
different.
then we would never know who Sharon is.
Right.
It's so gone.
It's just
all bad.
It's such an it's an awful story in terms of what happened, but it's very intriguing.
It's very interesting.
Very interesting. So if you are
looking.
ever on Netflix and you haven't watched it yet, Mr. Cameraman, you should probably watch it.
Yes. Highly recommend it.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Again, kind of depressing. But if you're into crime, which I clearly am.
Yeah.
It's an intriguing story to say the least.
I would definitely recommend.
Never stops turning.
I would definitely recommend watching.
As much as we just talked about, there's probably more shit that
there's
I missed.
A lot of little details in there that you
crazy.
can't possibly explain in like in a podcast episode without just essentially reading the storyline over. I mean, if you watch it, you'll find out way more. There's a lot of little details that happen where it just adds to the creepiness of everything. So I would definitely.
And if anyone has recommendations of other creepy things that we can watch for what's on Netflix,
shoot us a message. Episode 3 is in the books.
Yes.
Episode 1 of What's on Netflix is in the books, and we will see you on the next one of the Mat and Sara Show.
Very exciting!
Yay!
We have a logo.
We have a logo and a name.
Yes.